Chapter 169, Draco's Worst Nightmare. Friday, May 17, 1996, 4 days to North Korean coup attempt new Moongreat Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry Great Britain Horcruxes left. 3. Ring, Snake, Cup. Draco Malfoy jumped back in surprise as the owl dropped a letter in his pumpkin tart. It was once again from his father. To my son, Draco Malfoy. Please open this in private, as Lisa Van Papel seems to like you and wants you to be one of her best friends. Draco couldn't believe it. Lisa Van Papel, of course, was Lord Voldemort. Her best friends, presumably, were the Death Eaters. Had his work initiating the werewolf pandemic and killing off Lupin impressed the Dark Lord enough to promote him to full Death Eater status before he was 17? It was possible, though unlikely. He suspected that his father had been forced to do some fast talking to get the Dark Lord to agree. He hurriedly stuffed the envelope under his robe and finished his meal. Although he firmly believed in Lord Voldemort's pureblood policies and was honored that he had been made a Death Eater, he was starting to have second thought about this whole enterprise. Killing off Lupin and other Order of the Phoenix members were tasks necessary to keep the blood traitors out of their way. However, he had nearly fallen over when his father had informed him that Death Eaters were behind the attack on the American Department of Magic. Killing 1 or 2 enemies were one thing. Killing over 7,000 people who had not raised a wand against him was something entirely different. He hadn't voiced any of these concerns to his father, his friends, or Lord Voldemort. He had heard about what had happened to Regulus Black when Sirius's brother had realized that he'd bitten off more than he could chew while in Voldemort's service. Any sign of vacillation or weakness would probably earn him a killing curse in the chest. He tried to steel himself, reminding himself that sometimes doing the right thing was difficult. Had it not been for the work of Voldemort and the Death Eaters, the wizarding race could very well go extinct and leave the world at the mercy of the Muggles. His chain of thought was interrupted by a chuckling crab. "Well, Draco, look what we have here. I think he's got a girlfriend." Draco shook his head and stared at his bodyguard. "What?" "Lisa Van Papel. What is she, German? Did you meet her during the Triwizard tournament last year? Was she part of that half-breed Vila's school? I take it she's not a half-breed. If you're dating her, let's see the letter, Draco." Draco looked closely at Crab. His friend wasn't particularly bright, so Draco figured that he'd be able to get away with a simple alibi. Pulling Crab over to him, he whispered, "Lisa Van Papel is a Habsburg duchess a little older than I am. My father is trying to set up an arranged marriage. I'm distantly related to the British nobility, after all." Crab looked blankly at him. "Where is Habsburg? Is that a country?" Draco gritted his teeth. "It's the name of a Germanic noble family. Now, if you wouldn't mind, don't mention this out loud. It hasn't been finalized yet, and in case it doesn't, I don't want Pansy Parkinson to dump me. Can you get that through your thick skull, Crab? When my father wants me to open it in private, with no one else around, I do that." Crab slowly nodded and turned back to his food. Draco breathed a sigh of relief and excused himself so he could go back to his room and read the letter. He really wanted to see what his father had to say. "My dear Draco, I have just returned from a meeting with the Dark Lord. I have some news for you which will please you greatly. Voldemort was extremely impressed with your diligence and devotion in turning that chalice into a Portkey, so we could send Remus Lupin into the football stadium and start the werewolf pandemic. As you are probably aware by now, Lupin is dead, and 27 Muggles are running around England, not knowing that they are going to turn into slavering monsters in a matter of weeks. The only flaw in the plan appears to be that Minister Scrimgeour has realized the danger those infected Muggles present to the British community. He has alerted Prime Minister Major that these Muggles have to be rounded up and presented to the Ministry of Magic before 1 June, which is the date of the next full moon. We can only hope that a few of them evade the Prime Minister's dragnet and spread the pandemic further." Not only were you dedicated enough to assist with the Dark Lord's plans, you did so while you were busy studying for owls. Although Voldemort agrees that you should be commended and has the final say, I am a bit uneasy that you were so easy to distract from your studies. If you want to work with me in the Ministry of Magic, you will need to excel on your owls. I trust that your practice with the Portkey charm will not impact your grades at all, Draco. If it does, I will be most displeased. Back to the matter at hand. It is my great pleasure to inform you that Voldemort is now willing to waive the age 17 limit and induct you into the ranks of the Death Eaters. You will be given the same respect as Rodolphus Lestrange, me, and the Indian people who were recruited by Damodharan Dilmy. For the time being, however, you will not be branded with the dark mark. Although you certainly deserve the tattoo for your work, I don't want anyone at Hogwarts realizing that you have become a Death Eater. All we need to have happen is to have Dumbledore or Snape see that tattoo, and we would be in deep trouble. You would likely be expelled, at which point it would likely be race between the Dark Lord, your mother, and me to determine who would kill you first. As you are aware, each Death Eater has to undergo a rite of passage, a challenge, so to speak, to prove that he or she is strong enough to join the ranks of Voldemort's supporters. This challenge has usually involved the deliberate, direct murder of another person, an act which will forever sear your mind and soul and bind you to Voldemort forever. I tried to argue that your work with the Portkey was equivalent to this initiation rite, but the Dark Lord overruled me. Here is what you have to do. Once the Dark Lord receives word that it has been performed, he will officially name you a full-fledged Death Eater at our next meeting. Both me and your mother will be glowing with pride as we present you to Voldemort for the ceremony. Your task is simple. Kill Severus Snape. As you are undoubtedly aware, Snape has proven to be a double agent. He betrayed the Dark Lord to the British Secret Service, who dropped a Muggle explosive device on a Death Eater gathering on 15 March, killing virtually all of the British Death Eaters and reducing the Dark Lord to possessing a Muggle until I could retrieve him. You have told me that Professor Snape is teaching defense against the dark arts. This will not be tolerated. He knows all of our tricks and will almost certainly give students lessons in dealing with them. The longer Snape teaches that class, the less likely a Voldemort-dominated world will be. The longer Snape teaches that class, the more likely it is that you and I are going to be sent to Azkaban. Draco, I understand that you will have mixed feelings about this. Professor Snape has helped you immensely and transformed you into a man of honor. However, this is a war, and sometimes people have to do things they do not like for the greater good. I was shocked when I heard about Snape's betrayal as well. I personally liked the man, and I mentored him when we were at Hogwarts together. However, orders are orders. I have already mustered enough courage to sacrifice our feelings for Snape on the altar of our cause. Have you? I killed my first blood traitor at 15. I know you, Draco, and I trust that you have the fortitude and willpower to repeat this act at the same age I was at. Good luck, my son. Your father. Chapter 170. Afia meets the President. Saturday, May 18, 1996, 3 days to North Korean coup attemptable office White House Washington, Deke United States of America Horcruxes left. 3, ring, snake, cup. Bill Clinton was exhausted. He hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a time for more than 3 days. His aides were telling him that he needed to get some rest, and that Secretary Radnor's magical assistance couldn't keep him going indefinitely. However, he didn't have a choice. The United States had suffered its worst terrorist attack in history at the hands of an internal hate group at that. He had to do something to make sure it wouldn't happen again. He had spent the entire first night trying to help plan the raid on America for humans through the data retrieved from Reverend Pitmoss's computer. He had thought that tracking everyone down would be difficult, but he had forgotten about the wizards. The wizards' help had been amazing. Within 24 hours, 75% of the people on Pitmoss's list had been arrested and placed in holding cells. The biggest catch, of course, had been Pitmoss himself. Although it was fairly obvious that Pitmoss had been the mastermind, he still needed to have a fair trial. Granted, no one wanted to defend him, and Radner had already informed the president that since the attack occurred in wizarding territory, the defendant would have to be judged by a wizarding court and subject to a wizarding punishment. The secretary had already told him that it was almost certain that Pitmoss would be sentenced to the dementor's kiss, a punishment which would force the victim into a soulless, vegetative state for the rest of his natural life. It was the most severe punishment available under American wizarding law, more serious even than the death penalty. Some things, however, didn't add up. Radner had interrogated the prisoner using Veritaserum, a magical truth serum, shortly after his arrest, and had discovered that the balm had been provided by a shadowy group known as the Foundation. Neither Clinton or Radner had known about this group before, and apparently neither Pitmoss before its representative contacted America for Humans. Furthermore, Pitmoss had reportedly been shocked that Cambridge had been hit. He repeatedly insisted that he had had no plans to attack Cambridge. All that he had figured would happen was that the 4 towns would be drowned, and that was that. No Muggles would be harmed. He had also, grudgingly, been forced to admit that he had wanted to take out Radner himself with the bomb, and claimed that the secretary's survival was more proof that he was the false prophet. Radner had rolled his eyes at that. He looked at the latest document placed on top of his desk. It was from the Navy and reporting on the shipment of drinking water to the greater Boston area. All of the military vessels were in place now, and water was slowly trickling back to the citizens of Massachusetts. There had been a few riots here and there where people had complained that they needed more water, but for the most part everything had been peaceful. Granted, a few restaurants would go out of business and sales of deodorants would go through the roof. But a few inconveniences would be much more palatable than widespread dysentery. Most of the affected towns had started rationing water in a manner which would give each household running water 1 day a week. In an amazing act of charity, Cambridge, whose water supply was still intact, requested that Army Corps of Engineers build a pipeline connecting their reservoir to the line which had come in via the Quabbin. That would allow everyone 2 days of water per week instead of 1. The people of Cambridge itself, of course, were protesting. At the moment, it was unclear if the city board would be forced to retract the request. The current timetable the wizards had provided for the reopening of the reservoir had the Quabbin being usable again by mid-June. 1 month, the president thought. Let's hope things don't go to pieces in that time. What the citizens of Massachusetts likely didn't realize was the fact that even when the Quabbin was cleared for use, the fact that a lot of the water had escaped into the harbor meant that it would be at a dangerously low level. Water rationing in some capacity may have to stay in effect until the reservoir refilled, which could take a year or more. The response to this terrorist attack, the impact of hate groups, and the general view of wizards would likely revamp the entire presidential campaign. He wondered what he was going to do and whether he would be able to do it better than Bob Dole. He had a crazy idea of having Radner be his vice presidential nominee, but he doubted the political establishment would like it very much. The intercom on his desk buzzed. He pressed the button, and the secretary's voice burst out of the speaker. "Sir, Secretary Radner is here with a young woman. He says it's urgent. It's related to the attack." Clinton frowned. "Is the woman a witch?" "No, Mr. President." "Who is she, then?" "Someone with information about the attack. She seems terrified, to be honest with you. Sir, should I send them in?" "Have they been searched?" "Yes, Mr. President. The secretary had nothing other his wand, and the woman was unarmed. He vouches for her, sir. He says she is not a threat." This would be interesting, he thought. Pressing the button one last time, he said, "All right, send them in." "Yes, sir." Seconds later, the door opened, and Radna entered the room followed by a woman barely out of her teens. She appeared to be Indian or Pakistani and was wearing modest Islamic clothing. He couldn't see much of her face, but the little he saw was trembling in fear. Radna shook Clinton's hand. The president then turned to the woman and inclined his head to her in greeting, figuring that shaking his hand would be against her religious customs. Sitting back behind his desk, the president asked, "Secretary Radna, report." Radna was blunt. Mr. President, America for Humans had help and may have been partially framed. It would explain why Pitmoss didn't know everything about the attack. Clinton nodded. "We know that, Wizard Radna, the Foundation." "Correct, Mr. President." Or, as the expression goes when it is translated into Arabic, Al-Qaeda. Clinton leapt to his feet. "Al-Qaeda was involved with this, are you sure?" "Yes, Mr. President." Al-Qaeda saw America for Humans and realized that America for Humans would be the perfect front for an attack. If the attack fails or the government takes revenge on the attackers, America for Humans takes the blame. If the attack succeeds, Al-Qaeda claims responsibility. America for Humans likely had no idea that the representative of this foundation was actually a member of Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda is responsible for the attack on Cambridge, as they were likely the ones who opened the doors and let the water out. Pitmoss had no idea that would happen. Clinton stared at Radna, then Dilmy's warning. "Yes, Mr. President." Al-Qaeda had warned of an attack, and Pitmoss had warned of an attack. None of us thought, however, that they would both be the same attack and that Pitmoss was unknowingly a pawn of Al-Qaeda. And judging from our reaction so far, sir, we're behaving exactly the way Al-Qaeda was hoping. They get away scot-free while America for Humans is rounded up. For all we know, they're planning further attacks. That's not to say that America for Humans is innocent, of course. Pitmoss will still get the dementors' kiss, but it does spread the blame. Clinton sat down. "God Almighty, they attacked us in revenge for the attack on Dilmy. How did you find this out?" An investigation of the Greenwich site revealed evidence that a wizard was involved. A wand was found in the mud and connected to Mohatma Damil, a known Death Eater and associate of Dilmy. He was dressed in Muggle clothing, so no one knew he was a wizard. Furthermore, we believe that this wizard cast a spell of invisibility so that no one other than the attackers could have seen the plane which dropped the bomb. That would explain the sound of the engines, but no visible aircraft. The actual spell cast is more complicated, but the upshot is that there is probably nothing we could have done to stop it at the time. Nothing. No one had ever expected a magical attack. We're remedying that as we speak, though. Clinton turned to the frightened woman at Radner's side. "Is this woman related to Damil?" "She is a former MIT student who is an Al-Qaeda defector. We'll call her Agent S. She was ordered by Dilmy to perform an operation which would soften up the wizard's defense. She changed her mind at the last minute and decided to switch sides. As it turned out, that change of heart may have saved thousands of lives. She has sworn an unbreakable oath to serve us, one which was witnessed by a member of the United States Marine Corps." Lowering his voice as to not frighten the woman, the president asked her, "What did Dilmy tell you to do?" The woman could barely speak. "I was ordered to kill Jelena Kurchatova, also known as the Russian House Witch." Clinton spun back to Radner. "The girl we just gave a medal for saving Boston." Radner nodded. "Yes, Mr. President. If she had been killed, I doubt anything could have been done to stop the flooding. As it was, Guinevere de Mornay needed help, and an engineer would be a good asset to have when plugging a leak like that. Were it not for those two witches, most of Cambridge and Boston could have been flooded, and hundreds of thousands of people left homeless." Clinton whistled as the girl spoke once again. "I now believe that Allah made me join Al-Qaeda in order to realize how bad the group was and let me turn it over to the authorities. I had found it difficult to accept the assignment to begin with, but I was afraid of Dilmy and figured I had no choice. Later, When I was alone in the dormitory with her and her two friends, I realized that they meant no harm and that it would be wrong to kill her. I've come to ask for asylum, sir. Al-Qaeda is a threat, and the group needs to be stopped. The president stared at Radner and back at the girl. The girl was almost crying. As a politician, the president was good at detecting fake smiles and false emotions. This girl, however, truly meant it. She could be a valuable asset. First things first, however, he needed to give another speech to the nation. Once that was done, he needed to figure out what to do to Al-Qaeda. And with the America for Humans people, he had already rounded up. Chapter 171, Expensive Ferret. Saturday, May 18, 1996, 3 days to North Korean coup attempt outside of Leeds, England. Horcruxes left. 3. Ring, snake, cup. Nagini was in a bad mood. She had completely lost track of Igor Karkaroff. Her master said that he was supposed to be around here, yet he wasn't. Could her master have been given false information? If so, he would be very angry. If she were lucky, he'd send someone over for her to eat in place of Karkaroff. So far she'd been able to survive on various stray animals in the forest. Although there was a lot of small game out there, they weren't enough to fill her stomach. She needed a bigger meal in a hurry. She would have preferred Karkaroff, as he would probably fill her belly completely and make it so she wouldn't have to eat for weeks. But she would take anything larger than a mouse at this point. She decided that she would have to go back to one of the rendezvous points she had agreed on with her master. He had told her that every so often he would check various out-of-the-way locations to see if she had either found Karkaroff or needed to be transported somewhere else. She was increasingly convinced that she wasn't going to find Karkaroff in this area. The nearest rendezvous point was in a field outside the human city of Leeds. She was normally careful with human cities as people tended to be scared of snakes. However, there were times when caution couldn't be afforded. What would her master have done had he not had a full meal for weeks? Her scent receptors picked something up. Another mouse, she thought. It didn't smell quite like a mouse, though. But whatever it was food. She couldn't be picky. Cautiously, she closed in on the scent. Then she caught sight of her quarry and was nearly beside herself with excitement. It looked like a mouse, but it was a lot furrier and much bigger. It was white and had a big, fluffy tail. A smaller tail, thin and brown, seemed to extend from around the creature's midsection into the air. What an odd place to have a tail, she thought. Still, 2 tails would provide more nourishment than one. She caught another scent maybe 15 feet away, in a different direction. This scent appeared to be human, so she grew wary. She lowered herself further down into the grass, hoping that the human wouldn't see her. She needed to catch this mouse and escape before the human saw her. The thin brown tail, oddly enough, seemed to lead from the mouse towards the human. Perhaps the mouse had tried to run from the human. Nagini managed to get within 5 feet before the gigantic mouse noticed. The animal squeaked and suddenly began to run away from her. Bizarrely, its normal tail stayed in place behind it, while the odd brown tail continued pointing in front of it. It was as if it were running over its own tail. Had she not been so desperately hungry, she would have found it amusing. She pursued the mouse as quickly as she could. She was about 3 feet away when she heard a human shout a word. She spun to face the new sound and saw a very angry human female holding onto the mouse's brown tail. The mouse slithered between her legs, and she picked it up with her paws. She then shouted something at Nagini, which the snake didn't understand. "You're not eating my ferret, and you're not eating me. I'm calling the park ranger." The human seemed angry and threatening. She arched her back to try to scare the human away. It appeared to work, as the human ran away. Unfortunately, the human took the mouse with her. That was not fair. Well, she thought, if there was one big mouse around here, there could be others. She was near the rendezvous point, and the sun was not yet at its highest point. She had time to look around for more mice. She searched for a few more minutes and found nothing other than a couple of inchworms. Big deal. She thought she had detected some human-like cries, but could not see any other humans through the grass. Suddenly, she heard a sound that she had never heard before. It sounded like an ululating scream, but she had never heard humans make a scream like that before. The grass around her began to flicker with flashing light the color of the sky. Was that an animal call of some sort? Maybe she should hunt this animal instead. She turned to face the light and saw an object which her master had told her was a Muggle vehicle. There were flashing lights the color of the sky on it, and it said 3 words on it. The words were meaningless to her. Police, animal control. She had inched a little closer when she suddenly felt something bite her on the side. There was a brief moment of pain. She spun in shock to see what had bitten her. Whatever it was going to some fangs in their neck. She found herself surprised again, as whatever it was appeared to be obscured by the grass. There were a few humans in the distance, but too far away to be much of a problem. As she looked around, she found that she felt tired all of a sudden. She had to eat, however. She moved forward a little more when something bit her on the other side, in the direction the flashing lights had come from. She was thoroughly confused, but was too tired to do much about it. Within seconds, she had fallen asleep. She did not know how long she had been asleep. Her body ached a little from the bites, but the pain seemed to have subsided a lot. She looked around to get her bearings, and for the first time in a long time, she found herself utterly confused. She appeared to be in a glass container of some sort. The container was quite large, maybe 8 feet across. However, she was 12 feet long, and it didn't fit her all that well. She tried to climb out of the container and found that the container had a lid. She couldn't get out. What was she going to do? Had Karkaroff trapped her? The container appeared to be in a large room. She looked around the room to see if she could find Karkaroff, but she didn't see him there. Come to think of it, she didn't see any humans around. All she saw, most surprisingly, were lots and lots of animals. Most of the animals near her were snakes. She was by far the largest snake in the room, though there were still a few maybe 6 to 8 feet long. There were a few birds further away, and an odd animal with a shell sitting in a corner. Had she entered a kitchen somewhere? Had her master rescued her and brought her to a place where she could eat these animals? It would have made sense except for one fact. If she was supposed to eat these animals, why couldn't she get out of the container? She looked around the room more closely and found that each animal was in a container which it could not get out of. Nagini found this disturbing. Had these animals done something wrong? She hadn't done anything to warrant being placed in a box she couldn't get out of. Unless Voldemort was unhappy she had not found Karkaroff. Each of the boxes had a piece of parchment on them. The one closest to her, on a box with a 7-foot python in it, said, Rogers Reptile House Burmese Python pound 139.95. Food pound 49.95 extra. She couldn't read the writing, so that didn't help much. However, the snake in the box was looking at her curiously. Finally, he spoke. Well, hello there, big girl. Who are you? Nagini introduced herself. I'm Nagini. Who are you? Where am I? I'm Belle. We're in a holding area for people to take us away. What do you mean, take us away? Belle flicked his tongue towards the front of the room. Every so often, someone walks into this room. Money changes hands, and one of us, a bird, a turtle, a snake, anybody is taken from the room. I don't know what happens to us after that. Nagini grew alarmed. I hope we aren't killed. I don't think I've done anything to warrant getting killed. My master seems to like me. Your master? Lord Voldemort, Belle. You must know of him. You're a snake. Belle cocked his head at her. I can't say that I have. Then again, you're probably special. You're the biggest snake I've seen here in a long time. Why, the little sign says that you're going for £319.95. From what I can tell, that is a lot of money. The people must think you are valuable. I bet they'll tell everybody you're here, so someone can get you. Nagini liked that. I hope they do so Voldemort will come for me, but where am I? I have no idea. However, what I can tell you is that I think the boa constrictor over here has a thing for you already. Nagini listened to Belle prattle on about her new home and how half the male snakes told her she was special. She didn't need some 7-foot twerp to tell her she was special. Voldemort had chosen her, and he would get her out of this predicament, wherever she was. Chapter 172. Clinton accuses Al-Qaeda. Saturday, May 18, 1996, 3 days to North Korean coup attempt Sanders' residence of Prescott, Arizona, United States of America. Horcruxes left. 3. Ring, snake, cup. The doorbell rang, and Isaac Sanders got up to open it. He suspected from the high-pitched voices outside that he knew who his guests were going to be. Sure enough, he looked outside and saw several children standing on the doorstep carrying a small basket. The child with the basket smiled nervously and presented the basket to him. "Mr. Sanders, my friends and I want to help fix all the problems in Boston and make everything happy again. We've all decided to give you our allowances so you can use it, those people." Sanders smiled and looked into the basket. There were a few dollar bills in there and a lot of coins. "Thank you so much, boys and girls. How much money do you have in there?" One of the other children spoke up. "I counted $25.12. That's a lot of money, Mr. Sanders. However, I believe that it's worth giving up something when other people are hurting." Sanders didn't think that $25 would do much good. However, it was the thought that counted. Shaking each child's hand in turn, he said, "It is indeed worth it, my young friends. It is indeed." The children paused for a moment. Finally, one of them blurted out, "Can you do a trick for me?" Sanders shook his head. "I'm afraid not. Although I work for the wizards and can visit Fourth Mesa as much as I want, I'm not a wizard. I'm a muggle, just like you are. However, next time I see the wizards, I'll see if they can put on a magic show for the children of the area." The children cheered and jumped up and down. Thanking them once more, he sent them off and closed the door. That $25 had pushed today's donation total up over $15,000. Most of it had come in the form of checks written by ordinary people. The vast majority of these checks had been in the $50-100 range. However, he couldn't help but be awed at the $10,000 check made out by one of the Phoenix Cardinals football players. Sanders wondered if it was the first time that he could think of where something good actually came out of a tremendous NFL salary. In the old days, he would have simply flew over to Fourth Mesa and given 2 Bear the money. However, security had been tightened immensely since the attack on the 4 towns. The flu network connections had been completely cut off, and apparition into and out of Fourth Mesa was made impossible unless the bearer carried a special token. This made Fourth Mesa virtually impregnable. Unfortunately, it also made it impossible for Sanders to make it to work without wizarding assistance. Even worse, Melissa suddenly found herself effectively out of a job because she wasn't allowed to apparate while pregnant. Melissa's unemployment, however, proved to be short-lived. 2 Bear, realizing that she wouldn't be able to come to her classes, had realized that the only way she would be able to teach would be for the wizards who could apparate to come to her. They had already had 3 lectures in their living room here in Prescott. Sanders chuckled. At least they had tried to have 3 lectures. So far, all the wizards had done was gawk at all the Muggle equipment. The telephone seemed to baffle them, and they all seemed to be hooked on Tom and Jerry cartoons. Their class had grown drastically. There were now more than 50 people enrolled in Muggle studies at the Dine Institute of Sorcery and Shamanism, and it had gotten to the point where the 2 of them had break the class into 2 halves and have 2 separate sections, one led by each person. Had they not broken up the class, there would have been no way to fit everybody in the living room. Sanders hated to think what he'd do when Melissa eventually went on maternity leave. Right now, he was watching a rerun of a college football game. Considering the traumatic events that had taken place over the past few days, virtually all sports events were on hold so that the nation could mourn the dead. ESPN was having multiple interviews with athletes who had started funds to help the Wizards rebuild. One of the Seattle Supersonics players had donated a full $500,000 to a fund started by Fred Rogers, the personality behind the television program Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Supposedly, the man had nearly fainted when he received the check. The screen suddenly shifted to a banner reading Special Report. Sanders jumped in surprise. What was this? Did Pitmoss escape? Were the wizards attacked again? He ruled out the second option immediately. Had one of the remaining wizarding headquarters been attacked by vengeful America for Humans agents, he would have probably heard about it through Strong Bear or Two Bear before it made the news. The Special Report banner vanished and was replaced by the presidential seal. It looked like the president was going to be issuing another speech again. Sure enough, the announcer said that Bill Clinton was about to issue an important announcement. Seconds later, the president appeared. The man looked like he hadn't slept in days, which he probably hadn't. Although he fought to maintain a dignified facial expression, it was obvious that he was in shock. Sanders suddenly had a horrible suspicion. Fourth Mesa had been attacked, which would explain a frightened president and no warning from Two Bear and the rest of the wizards. The president looked into the camera and began his speech. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Tuesday morning, when I first informed you about the attack on the cities of Dana and Greenwich, I promised you that I would update you if any important new information came in. I am making this announcement to fulfill that promise. The last time I spoke with you, I told you that all of the evidence pointed towards America for Humans being behind the attack. Reverend Pitmoss's arrogant boast on the internet was a virtual admission of guilt, and the government has taken steps to make sure that America for Humans will no longer threaten the people of this country. What was unknown at the time, however, was whether the operation against the Quabin was a joint operation of America for Humans and another group. Pitmoss mentioned that a group called the Foundation had helped him plan the attack. We would have mentioned this earlier, except that the FBI has no records of any group called the Foundation, which would have condoned an attack against fellow American citizens. My fellow Americans, the mystery has now been solved. America for Humans was indeed assisted by a group which calls itself the Foundation. The confusion was based on the fact that the group was using the Arabic word for foundation, Al-Qaeda. Sanders stared at the screen. Al-Qaeda was involved in this as well. God Almighty. Al-Qaeda support, however, explained one of the aspects of the attack which didn't make sense. How would a newly formed anti-wizard group like America for Humans manage to get their hands on a sophisticated explosive device like a depth charge? The answer was now obvious. Al-Qaeda had given them the weapon. They would never have been able to obtain one on their own. The president continued. While Secretary Radner and I were standing in the Rose Garden presenting awards to witches Kurchatova and de Mornay, the people of Enfield and Prescott were investigating the site of the Greenwich attack. They discovered evidence which astounded them. They discovered the bodies of several people. Many of them were Muggles associated with America for Humans. Secretary Radner teleported back immediately after the award ceremony and identified two of the Muggles as Pastor Fred Phelps and Mr. Patrick Dursley Burgess, two men on the executive committee for America for Humans. This data, of course, is consistent with the theory that America for Humans did it alone. The surprise, however, was the identity of the last person. The person was dressed in ordinary American clothing, just like you and me. What was unusual about this man was the fact that a wand was found nearby. A magic wand, usable only by a wizard. Sanders put his hand over his eyes. Was Clinton saying what he thought he was? By order of Grand Mugwump, Anastasios Dialynis of the International Confederation of Wizards, all wands are registered. This particular wand had been registered to Wizard Mohatma Damil, an Al-Qaeda member and colleague of Damodharan Dilmi. The sixth body proved to indeed be Damil's, complete with the tattoo on his arm, identifying him as a supporter of a British dark wizard, Tom Marvolo Riddle. Wizard Riddle proved troublesome in the British Isles back in the 1970s and was recently thwarted in an attempt to regain power. Here is what we believe happened. Al-Qaeda believed that they could attack the United States and cause our great nation to blame it all on America for humans. As a result, they insinuated one of their members, Damiel, into America for humans under the cover of a group called the Foundation. America for Humans, not realizing that Damiel was a terrorist wizard, accepted his help. Damiel then provided the bomb and cast a magic spell which prevented the security around the cabin from detecting the attack aircraft as it came in to deliver the weapon. Although the 4 towns were filled with wizards, it had never occurred to them that they could be subjected to an attack with both magical and mundane components. Their Al-Qaeda plan was diabolically brilliant. If the attack were to fail or the government cracked down heavily on the attackers, America for Humans would take the blame. If it were to succeed and destabilize the country, Al-Qaeda would preempt America for Humans' claim of responsibility and say that they had used America for Humans as a front. America for Humans, as a local group, becomes a scapegoat and is attacked while Al-Qaeda still gets away. Had we not discovered the bodies in Greenwich, it is quite possible that we would have never reasoned out Al-Qaeda's involvement. There is another piece of evidence which ties the attack to Al-Qaeda. One Al-Qaeda operative defected to our side after she refused to carry out an order to assassinate Witch Kurchatova shortly before the attack. Needless to say, the death of Kurchatova would have made stopping the flood in Cambridge much more difficult and could have conceivably cost hundreds of thousands of people their homes. It would have made a disastrous attack into a veritable apocalypse. This defector has sworn an oath to renounce Al-Qaeda and serve us. The oath was witnessed by Witch Kurchatova and a member of the United States Marine Corps. Just a few hours ago, this defector and Secretary Radner were here in the Oval Office briefing me on these new developments. The nation owes her a great deal of gratitude. The camera zoomed in on Clinton's face. Ladies and gentlemen, the involvement of Al-Qaeda changes things drastically. Although it is obvious that America for Humans still bears some of the responsibility for the attack, and the people who were rounded up will be put on trial, as I had mentioned earlier, the fact remains that we must expand the investigation. We need to strike back at Al-Qaeda and avenge these 7,000 deaths using whatever means possible. This struggle will be long and difficult. Unlike most conflicts in the past, Al-Qaeda is not a nation-state. The group is small and mobile and will be hard to pin down. The fact that they have wizards among them makes our task even more complicated. However, rest assured that we will prevail and avenge the people of Dana and Greenwich. My fellow Americans, I do not want this to come to war. I urge nations which harboring Al-Qaeda members to turn them over to the appropriate authorities. As of today, the United States government will be awarding a bounty of up to $1 million to anyone who provides information which leads to the capture and conviction of an Al-Qaeda operative. This bounty will be available to residents of foreign countries as well. However, I must be frank and admit that some nations may not support us in our quest to destroy the terrorist organization. I would like to give these nations fair warning now. If you refuse to hand over the terrorists within your borders, we are going to come in and get them. That is all for now. Thank you for your time, and may God help us all in the months to come. Chapter 173. Dumbledore's Army Grows. Saturday, May 18, 1996. 3 days to North Korean coup attempt Hogsmeade Civic Centre Hogsmeade Great Britain Horcruxes left. 3. Ring, Snake, Cup. Severus Snape had never thought he'd see the day where something good came out of Dolores Umbridge's tenure at Hogwarts. Well, he'd been surprised once before, and he had been surprised again. Shortly after the term began, the ever-so-arrogant Chosen One had decided to take defense against the dark arts into his own hands. Realizing that theoretical work would not help the students defend themselves against real-life Death Eaters, he had started a secret society known as Dumbledore's Army, which would conduct practical defense against the dark arts classes in the room of requirement, though in a different configuration, supposedly, than the one which had held Voldemort's Horcrux. Snape had to admit that Harry Potter was actually competent at defense against the dark arts, and he eventually found himself in the position of teaching everyone in the class everything that he knew. The group had started out small, with maybe 20 students. Most of them had been Gryffindors or friends of Mr. Potter. There had been rumors circulating around the school that the club existed, but Dolor's Umbridge had been too busy dealing with the Super Bowl breach to really get around to disbanding it. While Harry had been under house arrest, Ronald Weasley and Hermione Granger had taken turns giving lessons. Things had changed drastically, however, when the Dark Lord came back, those bloody Horcruxes, and Cornelius Fudge was ousted. Everyone promptly began clamoring for practical defensive magic, and Scrimgeour wisely recalled Professor Umbridge and replaced her with Snape himself. Voldemort's return almost immediately inflated the number of people enrolled in Dumbledore's army to over 50 people, including several Slytherins. Word of the group spread once Umbridge was no longer to suppress it, and by the beginning of May, it was up to over 100 people. Snape had once sat in on some of the group's lessons and was actually quite impressed with the dedication of the Dumbledore's army members. He eventually decided to have each class's defense against the dark arts lesson consist of a visit to the Dumbledore's Army Training Center in the Room of Requirement, effectively legitimizing the group. The students appreciated that a lot. Granted, part of Snape's rationale was to try to hide the fact that he'd never taught defense against the dark arts before, and didn't really have a syllabus to base the course off of now that Voldemort had stirred the cauldron once again. It was at this point that somebody found out about it in Hogsmeade. The mayor promptly started screaming at McGonagall, who was by then headmistress, to move the classes over to Hogsmeade so that ordinary wizards could take lessons. The students, of course, were all for it, as it gave them a chance to visit Hogsmeade. After a brief discussion, the staff had agreed to move defense against the dark arts over to the Hogsmeade Civic Center. With owls just around the corner, Snape had finally managed to badger Harry into letting Snape himself take over the lessons while Harry started cramming for his owls. Although Harry hated Snape as much as Snape hated him, he conceded that Snape was probably the best man for the job. After all, he was a former Death Eater. Membership in Dumbledore's army had increased explosively as soon as the classes were moved into the Hogsmeade Civic Center. According to the last census, taken on 16 May, there were over 1,500 people enrolled. Most of Hogsmeade had joined up, as did many members from surrounding towns. People were supposedly clamoring to get classes like this in London as well. Snape had found very quickly that there was no way he was going to be able to give all of these students the personal supervision required to master defensive magic without killing each other. He had been forced to break the group up into sections which had classes at different times throughout the day. He would prepare a lesson for the day and then teach the same class over and over again to different groups of students. Shortly after that, he managed to convince Rufus Scrimgeour to start sending over auras to help train the people. The minister had complained that most of the auras were tracking Voldemort at this point, but eventually he had caved in and told all of the auras who had been assigned to the SAS to take some members of their battalion and teach classes while they were waiting for assignments. Not only did this reduce class sizes to something more manageable, it allowed the Muggle agents to familiarize the citizens of Hogsmeade with Muggle weapons, such as guns. He wouldn't be surprised if Voldemort tried to surprise wizards by hiring Muggles to attack them with weapons the victims weren't familiar with. Snape also realized that this put him in a very dangerous position. Voldemort undoubtedly knew that he was training wizards to fight against him. If Snape had been in Voldemort's shoes, he would have insinuated someone into Dumbledore's army who would eventually try to assassinate him. A green Avada Kedavra beam would easily be lost in the mixture of Expelliarmuses and petrificus totalis beams. Fortunately, he was good at legilimency and probed prospective students' thoughts before they joined. Not only would that unmask any assassins, but it would warn the student that their own thought could be used against them. This was a perfect segue to occlumency training. Unlike his first occlumency student, an obstinate Harry Potter, these students were much more willing to work on their lessons. He took another look at his schedule. His next lesson was occlumency with Class B. Class B consisted primarily of Hogsmeade adults ages 25-50. Most of them had been former Hogwarts students. Snape had suspected that many of them had forgotten most of their lessons after taking their owls and newts. Snape chuckled to himself. Occlumency with adults could be quite entertaining, especially if no one in the class was under 17. He wondered what he would find today. There were about 50 people in the room, which is the maximum class size he would allow. He chose one person at random, a woman in her early 30s, and pointed his wand at her. He shouted, "Legilimens." The woman squirmed for a while and begged him to stop the attack. Snape shook his head angrily. "This is an attempt to train you to resist Voldemort, Mrs. Parker. He will not relent no matter how much you plead with him. Therefore, neither will I. You must use occlumency if you want to keep the Dark Lord from finding out your deepest secrets. He will not think twice about using them against you and revealing them to the world." Snape then stared at her, hard, and therefore neither will I. The crowd gasped, and the woman went pale. Snape grinned and slowly nodded. It appeared that she suddenly realized what he was going to do. Snape sensed her defense frantically strengthen, which was a good start. Unfortunately, it was not strong enough to prevent his attack. That was a failure as far as he was concerned. He knew what the punishment would be. Judging from the look on the woman's face, she did as well. Snape chuckled. My, Mrs. Parker, you've been seeing that man for what, 3 months now? You really should tell your husband about this. And you're pregnant. This sounds intriguing. Let me take a look here." The crowd tittered nervously as she shook her head in terror. "No, Professor Snape, please no." Snape's response was to roar at her. "Then stop me, and do not touch your wand." That final threat about revealing the baby's father appeared to do the job, as the woman's will stiffened, and she blocked out Snape's intruding thoughts. A slow smile spread across her face as Snape lowered his wand. "Very good, Mrs. Parker. That is a good start. Not many people manage to reveal only one secret the first time they are subject to legilimency. Let's see now whether contestant number 2 will do as well as you did." He turned his stern gaze on a man in his 60s. The subject gulped as his ordeal began. An hour or so later, every single student had been probed. The vast majority of them had spilled 2 or 3 secrets before blocking his probe. That was roughly average for a typical adult. He closed the class by obliviating the secrets which had been revealed out of all of the students' heads, along with the fact that he had tried to probe their minds. The only thing he let them keep was the experience they had gained with occlumency. This experience, of course, was the entire purpose of the lesson, and the obliviation allowed him to pull the same trick on them again. He figured that it would take a good 5 or 6 lessons for this group to actually be able to defend itself against someone as powerful as Voldemort. Chapter 174. Black, Sirius Black. Sunday, May 19, 1996, 2 days to North Korean coup, attempt 4 privet drive Sir England Horcruxes left. 3 ring, snake, cup, Sirius Black stared at the tiny room under the stairs. "You actually lived in this little hole in the wall for over 10 years. Harry nodded. "Yes, Sirius. My aunt and uncle treated me almost as badly as your family used to treat Creature. They were embarrassed that I even existed for the most part. That's why I was so excited when you told me I could move in with you on the way out of the Shrieking Shack." Harry didn't know whether to be comforted or disturbed by the fact that the Dursleys' house was now devoid of Muggles, and would be devoid of Muggles for a while. Both Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia were in jail on various charges, and had lost custody of both children. Dudley had been taken into an orphanage where he had likely found himself the low man on the totem pole. Harry figured it would be a big shock to him. The empty house meant that no one was going to be ordering Harry around or beating him up. Still, it just felt dead and empty. Sometimes, silence could be more deafening than the loudest sound. Sirius put his hand on Harry's shoulder. "Well, you're not going to have to live in there anymore. You've been to my house before, so you already know what's there." As the last surviving member of the Black family, and one who has finally been cleared of all charges, I am now the owner of that building. Once you leave Hogwarts at the end of the year, you and Dudley are going to be moving in with me. It's what a godfather is for, and I'm sure your parents would have approved. Harry nodded. "Sirius, I just can't tell you how much this means to me. You'll be the father I never had." "I hope so, Harry. I sure hope so. I still feel like it's partially my fault that your parents are dead. Had I not told James to switch to Peter at the last minute, they wouldn't have been betrayed. This is the least I can do to help atone for that sin." Harry fought back tears and looked at the clock on the wall. "I wonder how Dudley is going to take it. The people from the orphanage should be dropping him off here in a few minutes. He's never been comfortable with wizards, you know. None of the Dursleys have been." "He'll learn, Harry. I won't try to use magic around him until he's gotten accustomed to living with a new father. I promise you, Harry, that I'll be as good a father to him as his parents had been, if not better. I must warn both of you kids, however, that I may have to travel on important missions from time to time, so I may not always be in the house. Rest assured, though, that when those times come along, I will make sure that someone will be here to take care of both of you. That person will know to be careful with Dudley when it comes to using magic. However, I believe that the person may be able, in some cases, to impress Dudley with Muggle technology." Harry stared at him. "Missions? What missions?" Sirius grinned. "I wouldn't be able to tell you because they're secret. However, you'll find out why when we get to my house. It's going to be a surprise. A surprise which, I might add, is probably going to improve your cousin's opinion of me a great deal. He'll think I'm cool, Harry, trust me." Harry shook his head. "I find that hard to believe, Sirius." Sirius chuckled openly now. "Harry, even the Muggles are familiar with the organization which will be sending me on missions. Muggle children would be falling over themselves to have me as a father." Harry wanted to ask him a few more questions about his missions, but was interrupted by the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Sirius brought out his wand as Harry moved to the window and peeked out through the crack between the curtains at the visitors. Turning back to Sirius, he motioned for his godfather to lower his wand. "It's Dudley, all right, along with a person from the orphanage. He seems happy to be home. I get the impression that he didn't particularly like the time at the orphanage." Sirius arched his eyebrows at him. "I bet he can now relate to what you went through as an orphan." Harry froze for a moment in shock and then laughed. "I believe you're right, Sirius. I believe you're right." Motioning for Sirius to stay behind, Harry headed for the front door. He reached it just as Dudley opened it and stepped into the kitchen. The two boys stood there, staring at each other. For a good 10 seconds, neither said a word. Finally, Dudley made the first move. He rushed into the house and gave Harry a huge hug. "I never thought I'd be saying this, Harry, but it's good to see a familiar face. You wouldn't believe what I had to go through at the orphanage. It was a nightmare." Harry patted him on the back. "I know all too well, Dudley. I understand." Realization finally penetrated Dudley's thick skull. "The people in the orphanage treated me the way I used to treat you. Having been a bit of a bully throughout my childhood, I never really related to what it felt like to being the person being bullied instead of the person doing the bullying. I figure I should apologize, Harry." Harry nodded. "Apology accepted, Dudley. You'll never have to go back there again." Harry heard an odd sound and saw that Dudley was actually crying. "I'd also like to thank you once again for what you did in that underpass last summer. I thought that monster was going to kill me." Don't worry about it, Dudley. Anyone with a wand would have done such a thing. Dementors are terrible creatures. Dudley shuddered. That black-cloaked figure draining all the joy from my body. Those clammy hands. Harry nodded. I've seen them before, and... Suddenly he cut himself off. Wait a minute, Dudley. You actually saw the thing. Muggles can't see Dementors. Dudley wiped his eyes. I guess I'm a weird Muggle then. So, who's this Sirius Black they've been telling me about? Sirius introduced himself at that point. That would be me, Dudley. I'm Sirius Black, Harry's godfather and your new father. Is there anything I can do to make the transition easier for you? If you want, I can have you share a room with Harry once we get to your new home. Dudley blinked. New home. Yes, Dudley. I've actually got a place of my own which has been in the family for a long time. It's got more than enough space to house all of us. I must warn you, however, that I come from a wizarding family and that you will see many unusual things in this house. Harry and I have agreed that, until you are accustomed to your new surroundings and being around wizards, we will keep our use of magic around you to a minimum. You're a wizard. Yes, Dudley, I'm a wizard. However, I'm about to become something else as well, and I think you're going to like it, Dudley. Dudley whistled. Do you live in a floating castle or somewhere like that? Sirius chuckled. No, Dudley. I live in large apartment in downtown London. I'll tell you where it is once I've signed all the papers here, met with another wizard named Dumbledore, and sent the representative from your orphanage on the way. Harry understood immediately what Sirius was doing. Sirius couldn't divulge his house's location to Dudley for two reasons. First, he didn't want the orphanage to know that 12 Grimmauld Place existed. Second, he wouldn't have been able to tell Dudley anyway because Dumbledore, not Sirius, was the secret keeper. Dumbledore would have to do the job. Half an hour later, everything was signed. Dudley Dursley was now in the custody of Sirius Black. Harry had a most satisfying vision of his aunt and uncle dying of apoplectic shock. Sirius and Harry spent some time helping Dudley pack up the memories he had left at 4 Privet Drive and putting them in the back of the moving van with all of the possessions Dudley had brought to the orphanage. They then headed to London to meet Dumbledore. There was some traffic coming into London. Eventually, though, they made it to Grimmauld Place. Dudley's eyes widened when looked up at the street, turned to Dumbledore to be informed that 12 Grimmauld Place existed, and turned back to the street to realize that a building had just appeared out of nowhere. He blinked slowly. Okay, I'll buy that for now. Sirius told Harry, Dumbledore, and Dudley to hold back for a second so he could go and tell all of the portraits in the building to tone down their acts so as to not frighten Dursley. As he had feared, most of them promptly started screaming that Muggles were not welcome in their home, and that they were only tolerating the ones already there because they represented the British government. Sirius was eventually forced to conjure drapes to cover most of them. Once that was done, he came outside and told everyone it was all right for them to enter. Dudley was nearly bowled over when he saw Creature. The elf, of course, started screaming that Muggles were evil. Sirius promptly ordered Creature to obey Dudley as if he were Sirius himself. That shut the elf up. It took the rest of the afternoon to move Dudley's stuff in. As they did so, Harry noticed a lot of people in Muggle military uniforms gathering in living room. He didn't recognize any of them. He mentioned this to Sirius, and he said that it was all right. They could be trusted to keep secrets. Trusted more than virtually every other Muggle in the kingdom, in fact. Finally, Dudley's room was ready. Sirius had offered to use magic to clean it up and make it more attractive so that the transition would be easier, and Dudley had reluctantly agreed. His reluctance vanished as soon as Sirius cast the spell to spiff up the room. The group then headed downstairs into the living room. Harry's curiosity finally got the best of him. Rounding on his godfather, he asked, "All right, Sirius, who are these guys?" One of the Muggles smiled at Harry and responded, "Harry, we're the representatives of Her Majesty's Secret Service. We've come here to watch as he takes the oaths which enlist him as a member of our organization." Harry and Dudley both stared at each other. Finally, they blurted, "You've become a James Bond." Sirius shook his head. "I can't comment on any Secret Service operations, boys. It's classified. I'd also appreciate it if you didn't tell anyone outside the Aura community that I or any of these people are members. However, what I can tell you is that the activities performed by that particular movie character, albeit highly unrealistic and hyped up for movie purposes, are not inconsistent with those performed by members of this organization." With that, the Muggle who had spoken told Sirius to raise his hand and recite the oaths after him. Once Sirius had done so, the Muggle shook the new agent's hand and presented him with a Walther PPK. Sirius graciously accepted the Muggle weapon with his left hand. Meanwhile, in his right, he lifted his wand. Sirius looked from the gun to the wand and back again. Suddenly, he chuckled. "I must say, with a gun in one hand, a wand in the other, and the ability to turn into a dog, I'm going to make a really good spy." Dudley nearly fell over in laughter. Turning to Harry, he boasted, "I like this guy." Harry smiled. "I thought you would, Dudley. I thought you would." Sirius laughed even harder. "Trust me, Dudley, you're going to see lots of British Muggle secret agents around here. HMSS safe houses are believed to be secure, but none of them have the Fidelius charm to protect them." Chapter 175. Revenge for Esh Elohim. Sunday, May 19, 1996. 2 days to North Korean coup attemptia base Gimel location, classified Israel Horcruxes left. 3. Ring, snake, cup. Noam Tamir cheered as the announcement was made over the intercom. The powers that be had finally given them the okay to start the attack. The planes had been all fueled up, and the training missiles, which they normally carried around, had been replaced with live ones. His commanding officer had told him that every single person who had been a member of Esh Elohim would be activated for this run. Most of them had lost friends or relatives in the attack and were itching for revenge. Now, thanks to the Minister of Defense, they would get their wish. Noam knew the target area inside and out now. The Hamas headquarters was in a nondescript building in the middle of the West Bank. People probably walked by it every day without realizing the atrocities that its occupants could be committing at that very moment. It looked ramshackle and was likely going to be a soft target. There were a few wrinkles in the attack plan, of course. For one thing, the building was in a relatively populated area. Noam had the sinking feeling that this attack would likely result in several civilian casualties, which would just elicit a counterattack by the terrorists. Supposedly special agents were in the process of going door to door, trying to warn the civilians to get out. Those that agreed to come with the agents were hustled into cars and whisked out of the target zone. Those who chose to stay or put up a fight were arrested and turned over to Israeli authorities before they could warn the target. The second wrinkle involved the fact that what looked to be a soft target on the surface could actually be well defended. Noam suspected, as did many of the other people who would be participating in this mission, that there were anti-aircraft guns and other defensive weapons placed in the complex and in the buildings around it. Several of the pilots were going to be focusing on taking out ground support, while the Esh Elohim victims were attacking the base itself. The third wrinkle was the one which worried Noam the most: enemy wizards. Hamas had at least 2 wizards in their midst. He tried to put himself in the shoes of a Hamas operative. You have just executed a major terrorist attack against Israel. Clearly, Israel is going to want to get even and do so in a big way. What do? Well, you've got wizards. You have the wizards attack the Israelis as they come in. The Israelis aren't expecting magical defenses, so you will be able to hold your own more easily against the attackers. There had supposedly been a heated debate as to whether wizards should assist the fighter planes during the raid on the base. Minister of Magic Mikkel Oved had eventually decided against it. For one thing, wizards probably didn't realize how powerful Muggle weapons could be. Second, she was concerned that the fighting would escalate into a magical war where both sides began using spells to terrorize people and cause mass mayhem. Besides, wizards were clearly an unconventional weapon. How much of a step was it from wizards to nukes? Finally, how would it look if the Israelis used magic against the base, but the Hamas wizards hadn't actually been there? Noam hoped that Minister Oved had made the correct decision. He'd find out for sure in maybe 15 minutes. He put on his gear, went through the pre-flight checklist, and climbed into his plane. The target location had already been entered into the computer. All he had to do was head over there and fire off the missiles before anybody there had a chance to react. A few minutes later, he was airborne. There were 6 other planes in on the raid. The 4 on the edges of the squadron would be taking out ground forces, while the 3 in the center, all Esh Elohim victims, took out the base itself. The fighters stayed as low as they could to the ground. They didn't want the enemy see them coming. On the other hand, they didn't want the exhaust from their engines and possible sonic booms to damage the houses of the civilians below them. The proximity alarm beeped as the target came up over the horizon. He waited a few more seconds for his HUD to report that the missile had achieved a good lock. Meanwhile, puffs of smoke suddenly began shooting out of the houses near the target. Noam swore it appeared as if one of the civilians had managed to incapacitate one of the special agents before he could finish making his rounds. The base was likely on alert. He'd have to be careful. One of the pilots suddenly shouted, "Incoming missile, everyone scatter." Time for plan bet, Noam thought. The planes separated into 3 groups, one with 3 fighters and 2 with 2. It wasn't much of a scatter, but no one was going to be leaving his wingman at a time like this. Noam saw the missile heading towards one of the aircraft which had been on the edges of the squadron. The pilot frantically tried to evade, but the missile somehow managed to keep its lock. Noam had an uneasy feeling that a wizard was helping it out. The missile eventually hit the aircraft, knocking it out of the sky. Its wingman blasted the missile launcher as the pilot ejected, and the plane crashed into the ground. Noam checked the HUD one last time. He had a solid lock. Roaring in fury, he launched his first missiles. The 2 other Esh Elohim victims did the same. Within half a second, 6 live missiles were heading towards the compound. They crossed the intervening space in less than 5 seconds. Noam risked a glance away from an exploding anti-aircraft gun so he could watch them go on in. There was a big explosion. Noam frowned. Too early, he thought. It was almost as if something had detonated them. He was about to ask his wingmen what had happened when he heard a horrified voice over the intercom. "They've got a magical shield up. I can see what looks like a heat shimmer. The missiles are impacting on the surface and aren't reaching the ground." Shit, he thought. This was going to be bad. He watched in horror as an odd-looking yellow beam suddenly burst out of the smoke from the missile attack, slammed into the plane next to him, and detonated its missiles. The plane burst into flame, forcing Noam to swerve out of the way to avoid being incinerated. Switching to guns, he began strafing the target. The bullets bounced off the shield like hailstones. His proximity alarm warbled more urgently and reported that a missile had locked onto him. Double shit, he thought. He was probably dead, or at least going to be taken prisoner by Hamas when he ejected. He prepared to eject when suddenly something occurred to him. There had to be a limit as to how much that shield could withstand. It seemed to be able to defend the compound against missiles fairly easily. But would it be able to defend against a kamikaze attack? He yelled into the microphone. "Raffi, try to confuse that missile and have it lose lock. I'm going to try a kamikaze. Say goodbye to Anat for me. I should be dead anyway." His surviving wingman yelled at him, "Noam, are you crazy? They've got a shield." Against missiles and bullets, yes. However, something tells me they aren't expecting kamikazes, and we're a lot bigger than missiles. Cover me. Raffi nodded. "I'll do what I can. You'll receive a posthumous medal for this, Noam." "I'll eject before I hit. Now, Raffi, go." His wingman closed in a little more in an attempt to distract the missile. Sure enough, the missile started changing course. Yelling in triumph, the wingman aimed, pointed his aircraft at the base, and ejected. The aircraft made it maybe a couple of 100 feet closer to the base before the missile hit and blew it up. However, Raffi had done his job. The missile was out of the way. One last nudge on the control stick, and Gnome had his plane aimed directly at the base. Satisfied, he activated the ejection seat. The seat blasted him out of the aircraft. He got his bearings just in time to see his plane, with a few live missiles left, crash through the shield into the base. He caught a brief glimpse of a robed man disappearing just before the shock wave from the explosion would have hit the escaping wizard. He watched as the planes switched to guns and fired them into the wreckage. That would take out any terrorists still in the building. Against all odds, the attack had been a success. Or had it? Unless he had been mistaken, that robed man had been Rodolphus Lestrain, teleporting himself out of danger. And if one wizard had been able to escape, others could have as well. Gnome had a bad feeling about this as he settled to the ground. The Israeli Air Force had just embarrassed a whole bunch of wizards. Those wizards were going to be screaming to get even. He didn't want to be there when that happened. Chapter 176. Samuel passes judgment on society. Sunday, May 19, 1996, 2 days to North Korean, coup attempt to lax a Mosque Jerusalem Horcruxes left. 3, ring, snake, cup. The secretary knocked on the door and the cone Gaddle looked up. Sir, Samuel and his interpreter just walked in and are demanding to speak with you. They don't look happy. If anything, sir, they look resigned. The cone Gaddle put his head in his hands. Let me guess. He's pissed that the Israelis attacked the Hamas headquarters. I don't doubt it, sir. However, in all fairness, what else could you have done if you were the Israelis? The Hamas terrorists killed several hundred people. If you compare the size of Israel to that of the United States, the attack on Esh Elohim was probably equivalent to the destruction of the 2 wizarding towns. You must have heard the MKs calling for blood, sir. Otherwise, you wouldn't have made that statement asking the Muslims and Jews to stay calm and to not overreact. The cone Gaddle shook his head. And what would Samuel say that they should have done differently? Probably send wizards in to take out the 2 assassins without risking the lives of civilians. From what Hamas is reporting, a good 15 people were killed in the attack, many of them non-combatants. Hamas is vowing revenge, of course. Had the Mossad, the Ministry of Magic, or someone like that gone in and taken out the wizards directly, that would likely have been the end of it. Now, we're probably dealing with long series of revenge attacks. This is going to be a mess, sir. As if the entire history of this region hasn't been a mess. All right, Ibrahim, send them in. The former imam's face paled when he saw the expression on the 2 men's faces. Samuel seemed sad, and he had a bleak but resigned look on his face. The interpreter's face, on the other hand, bore an expression of absolute horror. It sounded like Samuel had reached a decision, one which likely did not bode well for the human race as a whole. The mere thought of what that meant sent a chill down the cone Gaddle's spine. The cone Gaddle stood to greet his guests. Welcome, gentlemen. We are honored by your visit. How can I help you? When Samuel responded, the words were choked with emotion. Even though the cone Gaddle couldn't understand what he was saying, the tone was obvious. Samuel had given up. He had returned to accomplish a mission, and he had finally reached the conclusion that the mission had failed. The cone Gaddle thought this over for a second and suddenly froze. The Mahdi had come to Earth to save it, just as the prophet foretold. It was obvious that Samuel was the Mahdi, even though he didn't admit it. What did it mean if the Mahdi determined that this world couldn't be saved? Allah help us, he thought. No, it couldn't be. That. Didn't Allah swear to Noah that he would not destroy the world again? He turned to the interpreter, who was shaking with fear. It took the man a good 10 seconds to respond. Holiness, I have come to visit you because I wish to say goodbye. I will soon be returning to Sheol, my mission and hope unfulfilled. The Cone Gaddle had to draw a deep breath to calm himself before he was able to continue. Goodbye, Holy One, your mission has just begun. You've made a big impression on both me and John Paul. It will just take time. Samuel shook his head. Unfortunately, you and John Paul are both in the minority. I can tell that both of you are righteous men. Unfortunately, there are far too many wicked men in your society and far few righteous ones. Righteous men existed in Sodom and Gomorrah, but not enough to prevent God from destroying those two cities. The Cone Gaddle's jaw dropped. You're saying that modern civilization is like Sodom and Gomorrah? That's impossible. Why, most of the people alive right now worship the one God. The look on Samuel's face made the Cone Gaddle cringe. They may claim they believe in the one God. Perhaps hundreds of years ago, closer to my time, the people of this world actually did believe in him. However, even if they do believe in him, they do not revere him. They claim to be following his doctrines while they kill each other with terrible weapons, challenge his supremacy through technology, irreparably damage the world which he created for them, and in general conduct themselves in ways which go against everything he said. As if that is not bad enough, the four sects who worship the one God are constantly fighting each other instead of cherishing their shared heritage. I believe that is precisely why God ordained the destruction of the classical state of Israel in the first place. It's exactly the same situation, except this time it is worldwide. And in both cases, the society was too far gone for the prophets of the Eternal to change the ways of the people in time. The Cone Gaddle tried to say something, but it came out only as a stammering croak. Meanwhile, Samuel bored on. The parallels are everywhere. Consider the Tower of Babel. The people of Shinar very likely started out building the tower in an attempt to praise and revere God. However, the tower grew and grew, and eventually people became corrupt. The tower eventually became tall enough to represent an obvious challenge to God's rule over the earth. The construction of the tower became society's single most important task. Human beings were discarded and thrown away when they could no longer make bricks, while those bricks were treated with the reverence you give your holy book, the Quran. God could not ignore this challenge. Seeing a unified society gaining power against him, he disrupted the society and destroyed the tower. There are legends I recall which appear to have not survived to your time. They claim that the tower was 500 cubits tall and could be seen from all over the land. People fought with each other just to make progress on the tower. With this in mind, compare this to what we have today. Not only do we have one 500-cubit tall building, we have many. You have told me there are plans in the works for buildings 1,000 cubits tall or more. God disrupted the offenders' society for a challenge even half that serious. As for the people fighting with each other just to make progress, that seems the way of life for everyone in modern industry. In both cases, people tried to stop the insanity, and in both cases they failed. Yes, holiness, the human race is just as it was at the Tower of Babel, and we both know what happened next. However, you are also doing things which are challenging God in other ways as well. You have used technology to perform some of the works which only God could have done. That is blasphemous in itself. You compare yourselves to angels and think you should have the ability to fly. You believe that you can outdo God at creation by learning how he created animals and possibly improving what he has done. Not only have you appropriated these abilities inappropriately, you do not even have the wisdom to use them properly. There are even rumors that a wizard in England has created a device which allows people to become immortal. God limited all modern humans' lifespans at 120 years for a reason. The Cone Gaddle finally managed to spit out a sentence. Holiness, Allah can't destroy us. He promised it to Noah. Samuel shook his head sadly. He may have promised not to destroy us. However, that doesn't say he won't sit back and let us destroy ourselves. Those bombs which destroy cities will be able to do it all by themselves. Either those, or those evil wizards who use their God-given power for evil instead of for good. The Cone Gaddle and the interpreter both burst into tears. The sounds brought people running in from the outside. The Cone Gaddle, however, shooed them all away. He couldn't let them hear this. It just wasn't right. If the world was going to be destroyed, he would let them die in peace. Samuel put his hand on the Cone Gaddle's shoulder, or at least tried to. When he spoke again, he was sympathetic. Holiness, as long as you are alive, there is still time to remedy the situation. I don't know how much time you have left, but remember, all you need is an instant. God will always forgive those who repent. Holiness, here is what I recommend. It is obvious that I am too unfamiliar with the modern world to minister to you in this time of crisis. My suggestion is that you create a gathering of all religious leaders and set them to work on the problem of repairing this broken world. They must continue the task I had started of reuniting the children of Abraham, and then eventually use this knowledge to redeem your society. In my opinion, this is the only chance you have. If you do this before the day of judgment, your society will likely be spared. If you do not, well, all I recommend is praying that your end be as painless as possible. Samuel stood up tall and looked around the room one last time. Angia, you call her Deborah, is speaking with John Paul at this moment, relaying him this message. I wish you the best of luck in the months and years to come, and will pray fervently that your society rights itself in time. Farewell, High Priest. Sighing, Samuel bowed to the Cone Gaddle and vanished. The Cone Gaddle and interpreter both started shouting, Samuel, please, come back. Samuel, Samuel, Samuel. No response. The two men looked at each other, horror on their faces. Slowly but surely, it hardened into determination. The Cone Gaddle called in his secretary. Ibrahim, listen, I need to talk to the Pope, now. Which one, sir? Both, Samuel. Deborah chuckled as Samuel entered the area. That was a clever idea, my former student. The old fire and brimstone speech with a liberal application of Judean guilt. I'm impressed, and people like Moses and Tickwell would be proud of you. Combine that with the fact that they see us as legends on the same level as Moses, Jesus, and Mohammed, and, well, I wouldn't be surprised if this actually does the job. Samuel stared at her somberly. I hope so, Angia. I honestly hope so. What happens if it doesn't work? Samuel stared at his feet. I don't want to think about it. Believe me, Angia, I don't want to think about it. This speech wasn't a prophecy doomed to happen, but odds are that disaster will strike them all the same if we fail. Chapter 177. I'm a what? Monday, May 20, 1996. One day to North Korean coup attempt mystery residence, 11 Osborne Road, 65-4, in Kilsyth, Great Britain. Horcruxes left. 3. Ring, Snake, Cup. Lauren Mistry watched the news. It seemed like the entire world was blowing up around them, and no one seemed to know what to do. President Clinton had suddenly come out and claimed that the attacks in Boston were partially due to Al-Qaeda. He had warned Afghanistan that the United States would be forced to occupy the country if the Afghans didn't hand the terrorists over to the United States. Kabul, of course, wasn't cooperating. She had a strong suspicion that the most powerful country in the world would soon be at war. That couldn't be good. The crackdown on America for humans was slowly beginning to peter out. Most of the organization's members had been picked up by now, and the rest were fleeing into Canada across the country's porous northern border. Busy with preparations for a possible invasion of Afghanistan, the government had delegated the responsibility for rounding up America for humans to the state level and to the 7 regional Department of Magic offices. The Quabbin was still polluted, and it would be for a long time. People in Boston were going crazy over the water rationing. The Middle East looked like it was about to explode. The Israelis had retaliated against Hamas for the attack on the synagogue and had targeted a base in the West Bank with an airstrike. Although the mission had been a success, The terrorists had managed to take out over half the strike aircraft. The stricken planes had fallen to the ground and destroyed several civilian homes. One hotshot deliberately crashed his plane into the base to destroy it. The resulting explosion destroyed it and 2 buildings to either side. Hamas was reporting 50 homeless and 15 civilian casualties. They warned their Zionist oppressors that they would avenge these casualties tenfold. Lauren had rolled her eyes at that. As far as she was concerned, the Israeli attack had been justified. She doubted that Hamas would be as philosophical about it, however. The entire Israeli government looked to be on the verge of collapse. Shimon Peres, whose labor coalition had already been in trouble, was being harangued by right-wing Likud members for the civilian casualties in the West Bank, and for not using wizards to ensure that the civilians weren't hurt. Anonymous sources reported that Likud was debating a no-confidence vote in Peres' government. These internal squabbles would likely just make it easier for Hamas to attempt future attacks. In other news, there had been an emergency session between the Pope Well, the real Pope, and Suleiman I, the high priest of the children of Abraham. Suleiman had been the imam in charge of the Al-Aqsa Mosque before a ghost, claiming to have been the biblical prophet Samuel, elevated him to the high priesthood. The 2 religious leaders refused to comment on the discussions, but judging from the expressions on their faces, they seemed saddened and frightened. They also indicated that Celestine Roman VI was supposed to have been in on the talks as well, but he had refused, claiming that Samuel's word was not valid. Finally, there were rumors of instability in the Koreas. Just what the world needed at a time like this, she thought. The only thing that was missing to trigger an apocalypse would be a rogue wizard taking control of a country. She shook her head when she realized what she was thinking. Tom Riddle had nearly taken control of her own country with that fictitious alliance for Magic Party, and he'd proven to be an evil wizard to boot. Thank God Scrimgeour and that Greek fellow managed to expose his schemes. She was still ruminating over the future of the world when the doorbell rang. Frowning, she walked over to the door and opened it to reveal an old, robed man with a long beard. She blinked. This person had to be a wizard if he was dressed like that. She looked at him skeptically. "May I help you?" "Indeed you may. I assume I am speaking with Miss Lauren Mistry." Her eyebrows shot up. "Yes, I'm Lauren. Who are you?" The man shook her hand. "My name is Albus Dumbledore. I am a teacher at the Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. May I come in?" Wondering how she would explain this to her husband, she opened the door further and let him in. The wizard walked in and chuckled when he saw the television. "Ah, a television. You Muggles have such fascinating contraptions. I like little gadgets like that." Lauren couldn't tell whether she should like this fellow or not. Was he making fun of modern technology, or was he just making a joke? She was about to say something about this when she looked at his face more closely and saw that all humor had vanished. The 2 of them sat down and the wizard leaned towards her. "Ms. Mistry, I need to tell you something very important. Is your husband here? He will need to know this as well." Puzzled, she went over to the staircase and called for Lucas. She had apparently lucked out and had caught him when he wasn't playing video games. He gaped at the man sitting on the couch, and his jaw dropped even wider once she introduced him as a wizard. Dumbledore nodded at her husband and then turned gravely towards her. "Do you have any children? They'll need to know too." Lauren shook her head. "No, Mr. Dumbledore. No kids. We're not expecting either, at least as far as we know." "Good. That will make things easier. Ms. Mistry, a few days ago the Prime Minister made a public service announcement targeting the people who had been bitten in the Wembley Stadium dog attack. Did you by any chance see that announcement?" Both Mistrys shook their heads. "No. Well, it's a good thing I came then. What I am about to reveal should not be told to anyone unless there is absolutely no alternative. It will very likely frighten you, and at the very least it will change your life forever. You see, that dog was no ordinary dog." Lauren chuckled. "I fully agree with you there, Mr. Dumbledore. It was clearly rabid, and I don't think I've ever seen a Great Dane-sized animal go that crazy. Dumbledore didn't blink. That animal was a werewolf. Lauren stared at her husband and then back at the wizard. Ah, say what? A werewolf, Ms. Mistry. They transform into wolves every month when the full moon rises. They remain in wolf form, attacking other people, until the moon sets, at which point they became human again and have no memories of their violent night out. Lucas snorted. That doesn't make sense, Lauren. Werewolves don't exist. And even if they did, why would one of them decide to go to a football stadium just so he could attack people? Dumbledore turned to Lucas. By your logic, wizards shouldn't exist either, yet here I am. If wizards exist, why can't other so-called fantasy creatures such as werewolves? And we know why he was at the football stadium. It was involuntary. He was sent there by Lord Voldemort. You know him as Tom Riddle against his will, specifically to attack people. By the time he realized what was going on, it was too late. The moon had risen, and the attacks had begun. Lucas grunted. Ha, now what does this have to do with us? I know my wife was attacked, but she seems to have come out all right. Granted, she's gotten a little more sensitive to light and likes red meat more, but that's minor. Dumbledore shook his head. That's not minor, I'm afraid. You see, the reason that Voldemort sent this werewolf in to attack the stadium is that anyone he bites becomes a werewolf as well. The symptoms you are describing, MS. Mistry, are all consistent with lycanthropy, that is, the condition of being a werewolf. Lauren stared at him. You mean to tell me I've been cursed to turn into an animal once a month? I'm afraid so, Ms. Mistry. You will likely start to feel nausea and experience headaches during the week leading up to the full moon. On the night of the full moon, the next one is 1 June, you will transform into a creature similar to the one which attacked you in the stadium as soon as moonlight hits you. You will lose control of your actions and attack everyone you encounter, turning them into werewolves as well. This would include your husband if he's around. If you are lucky and the sky is overcast that night so the moonlight never hits you, you will not transform. Lauren was speechless. She didn't want to hurt anyone, let alone her husband. Meanwhile, her husband broke in. You mean to tell me this is like a pandemic, something out of a biological warfare scenario? I'm afraid so, Mr. Mistry. I'm afraid so. Lauren finally regained the power of speech. This is not good. If I have turned into one of these monsters, what can you do about it? You're a wizard, right? You can fix it. Dumbledore shook his head. I'm afraid there is no known cure. I'm sorry. You will be a werewolf for the rest of your life. One of my staff members is teaming up with a pharmaceutical company to try to convert the wolfsbane potion, a potion which causes a werewolf to keep his mind when he or she transforms, into pill form so it can be mass-produced to people afflicted with lycanthropy. This will allow the werewolf to lock him or herself in a room and sleep through the entire night as a wolf without hurting anyone. Unfortunately, the pill is nowhere near ready for public use. It is likely that you will undergo at least 1 or 2 transformations before it is even ready for initial testing. Lauren glanced at her husband. Should the two of us separate? I don't want to hurt him. Dumbledore shrugged. It's up to you. However, if I were you, I would stay together and only separate just before the full moon. Transforming into the wolf shape is painful, and you will need as much emotional support as you can get. You can rejoin your husband once the moon sets. Lauren shuddered. Is there anything the two of us can do? The wizard nodded and pulled out an odd-looking contraption which looked like an ankle bracelet. As a matter of fact, there is. First, please don't tell anybody about your condition. That will likely just frighten them and cause you to lose friends. Second, the Ministry of Magic would like you to wear this locator device so they can track your whereabouts and bring you to London before you transform. In addition to tracking you, this device will automatically transport you to a secret location near the Ministry of Magic shortly before the full moon rises. There, wizards like me will witness your transformation and make sure that you do not hurt anybody or spread the pandemic further. Once the moon sets, it will transport you back where you came from. This will happen at every full moon. Dumbledore handed the ankle bracelet over to Lucas, who nodded and put it on her leg. She had one glimpse of it around her ankle before it suddenly disappeared. She looked back at Dumbledore, confused. The wizard explained. The bracelet becomes invisible so you can maintain your anonymity in the Muggle world. Otherwise, Muggles would start discriminating against people with ankle bracelets and think they were all werewolves. We do not want that to happen, as the world is troubling enough as it is. Dumbledore stood up and began walking to the door. I have to leave now to brief other attack victims. Do you know anyone else who was attacked who needs to be visited? We're still trying to contact all of the people who were attacked, but haven't been able to find 3 of them: Peter Oglethorpe, James Lovett, and Harrison Cooper. Do you know any of these men? If so, where are they? Lauren shrugged. I've never met any of them, sorry. Dumbledore sighed. I hope they turn up. All we need is one of them to transform and bite 20 more people to continue the pandemic. I've left my card on the coffee table there. Don't hesitate to call me if you have any questions. With that, the wizard opened the door and disappeared, leaving Lauren and her husband staring at each other and trying to figure out what they were going to do now. Chapter 178. Wizards Make Strange Bedfellows. Tuesday, May 21, 1996, 3 hours to North Korean coup attempt Prime Minister's offers Jerusalem Horcruxes left. 3, ring, snake, cup, Shimon Peres was in over his head. He'd been having trouble keeping his Labour government in place even before the wizards had been begun popping up. Several of his advisors had privately admitted to him that Netanyahu would have garnered enough MKs to take control of the government before the year was out. The announcement that wizards lived in their community had caught Peres completely off guard. He had just come back from a staff meeting at the end of January when he nearly ran into a woman he could have sworn he'd never seen before. She appeared to be in her mid-60s and had long grey hair done up in a bun. Unlike most of the women in the office, she was wearing a bizarre robe with bizarre symbols on it, and it wasn't a hijab or other type of Muslim modesty garb. She also had an odd-looking rod in her hand. Wondering how she had gotten past security, he immediately stopped her and asked for her name. She said that she was Minister of Magic Mickle Oved, and she needed to talk to him immediately. He remembered his reaction vividly. Minister of what? Her response had been to wave her rod, lift him a foot in the air, and put him down again. Needless to say, that attracted his attention. She then told him to go back to his office and close the door so that she could reveal some startling news. The next hour had completely changed his worldview. Wizards existed and were finally introducing themselves to the Muggles after centuries of secrecy. Her state of Israel currently had the honor of hosting an important wizarding educational institution, the Endor Institute. This institute had been training wizards and witches for over 3,000 years without interruption. As kingdoms and regimes rose and fell over the millennia, the institute considered itself a servant of whichever kingdom happened to claim its territory. Not that the kingdom knew that it existed, of course. The association with the kingdom would only come into play if the statute of secrecy broke down and the world was introduced to the wizards, which it had just been. By tradition, the leader of the institute always surrendered his or her name and took the ceremonial name Michael or Mickle, in the case of a woman, the servant of all. Over time, the all was dropped, and person became Michael or Mickle the servant. In Hebrew, that would be Michael or Mickle Oved. When he asked her what her birth name had been, she refused to tell him, saying that once she had been elevated to the leadership post, her past became irrelevant, and she was just an anonymous servant of all. Peres was astonished to hear that a former Michael Oved had actually made it into the New Testament traditions as the Archangel Michael. However, the Oblivators, the individuals responsible for keeping the wizard's secret, let that slide for 2 reasons. First, Michael was incorrectly depicted as an angel and not a wizard. And second, the people at the time needed a hero to believe in, and an angelic Michael would be therapeutic to the population. He asked whether many other biblical characters had in fact been wizards. She had shaken her head and refused to answer the question. Supposedly, scholars at the Institute had done some research on the biblical characters and had kept it classified, for the most part, lest the world find out that people who supposedly had been blessed by God had been ordinary mortals with unusual powers. All that she would say was that the prophet Samuel had been a wizard. She had told him that she was able to divulge this because the Bible mentioned an institute official bringing him back as a ghost, and only wizards could come back as ghosts. Hence, she wasn't revealing anything which would not become common knowledge once the Muggles, the non-magical humans, found out about the wizards. Oved explained that, due to circumstances beyond their control, the world had found out about the existence of wizards despite centuries of successful cover-ups. Realizing that there was nothing that could be done to cover up this particular breach, the wizards had agreed to reveal themselves to the world. As a result, the Endor Institute was pressed to command. What the hell was he going to do with a bunch of wizards? He had enough trouble dealing with Lakud. He told her he'd contact her if he needed magical help and went back to his daily routine. She told him that she'd warn him if anything unusual happened in the wizarding world, which could have repercussions on the Muggle one. He never thought he'd actually have to call upon Minister Oved. However, strange things had started to happen over the past few months. The ghost of the prophet Samuel popped up, made the Imam of the Al-Aqsa Mosque Cohen Gadol, and started screaming that the three Abrahamic faiths had to merge. A schism in the Catholic Church. An evil wizard masqueraded as a politician and tried to take over Great Britain. Some Sri Lankan wizard named Dilmi had knocked off bin Laden and taken over Al-Qaeda. The Saudi king had temporarily lost his mind, presumably a side effect of his stroke. Finally, there had been the attacks on the Quabbin Reservoir and Esh Elohim. Hamas with wizards was probably the only thing worse than Al-Qaeda with wizards. Figuring that the only way to defeat a Hamas wizard was with one of his own, he had finally called in Oved and asked her whether wizards should assist with the retaliatory airstrike. She had thought about it for a minute and decided against it. It was too early, and they didn't want this fight to escalate into a more serious international magical war. Wizards were like nukes or chemical weapons in the sense that they were unconventional weapons. In particular, you did not want both sides throwing them at each other on a regular basis. The entire country was screaming for a full-blown invasion of the territories faithful to Hamas. Although Pers wouldn't have minded seeing Hamas humiliated, he couldn't risk overreacting and doing something which Israel's Arab neighbors wouldn't like. Hence the air strike. Netanyahu and his colleagues promptly branded him a chicken, but he figured he had to do what he had to do. Of course, the airstrike had been a disaster. Yes, it had succeeded and destroyed the base. However, it hadn't been as surgical as he had wanted, and 15 civilians had been killed. Even worse, it hadn't knocked out the wizards, only the Muggles. Hamas was going nuts, of course, and Netanyahu was arguing that the decision not to include wizards on the strike showed that Pers was too old-fashioned to work with wizards. There were rumors that a no-confidence vote was on the way. He sure hoped not. One of his secure phones rang, the strident tone disrupting his chain of thought. He frowned and checked to see which phone it was. It was the Saudi hotline. Pers winced. What had Fard done now? He picked up the headset. Hello. Prime Minister, this is King Fard. How are you? All right, Your Majesty. I see you are using the secure line. Has something happened? Yes, Prime Minister. We have just concluded an investigation into my odd behavior a while back. It appears that my initial conclusion was correct. Amram Rickpreet and Lucius Malfoy were Voldemort supporters who temporarily took control of my kingdom by brainwashing me. Pers frowned. Voldemort, the evil British wizard. Yes, the reason I am calling is that we have reason to believe Voldemort wants instability in the Middle East. While I was under Rickpritz's control, I was forced to sign documents authorizing his supporters to join Hezbollah and Hamas. I think this is how the wizards got into Hamas, Prime Minister. I just wanted to warn you to keep an eye on them. Send people, wizards, Mossad, whatever, into Hezbollah and Hamas to knock them out before this whole place falls apart. Pers groaned. Can you order them back? I doubt they'll listen, Prime Minister. For one thing, they must know that I would execute them on the spot as soon as they stepped onto Saudi soil. For another, Minister of Magic Dagher here suspects that they serve Voldemort and were only using me as a pawn to get them into Israel. I see. What do you know about these wizards? Judging from the copies I have of the decrees I sent while under Rickpritz's control, we've got 6 in Hamas and 4 in Hezbollah. Their leader is Rodolphus Lestrain, the British man who was involved in the attack on Esh Elohim. He was the person who cast fire out of his wand and set the building on fire. That's 10, and there may be more we don't know of. Per swore, 10 evil wizards, possibly more. It sounds like this Voldemort has got wizards all over the place up here. Where is he getting them from? Dagger believes they're being recruited from the Indian subcontinent, Prime Minister. Dilmy was the head of a large cell over there, one that likely dwarfs the original group in Britain now that the British Special Forces have taken out most of the UK members. Dilmy may be dead, but his cell lives on. God help us, where's Lucius Malfoy? We don't know, Prime Minister, and we need to find out quickly. We suspect he isn't in the Middle East anymore. At any rate, I have authorized Minister Dagher to cooperate with you fully in getting these bastards out of the Middle East. Unless I miss my guess, he's busy talking with Mickle Oved right now and giving her detailed dossiers on each of these people. If you need any cooperation fighting Death Eaters, don't hesitate to ask me, him or her. Pers breathed a sigh of relief. Thank you, Your Majesty. We'll need all the help we can get. Good. I've already warned everyone in my kingdom and told all my diplomats to keep an eye out for Lucius Malfoy or anyone else with a tattoo of a snake on his arm. They are to be considered armed and dangerous and need to be taken out by nothing short of a wizard or a black op. Do not try any more airstrikes killing Muslim civilians. They're too dangerous, and most of us here don't like them. Pers started jotting down notes. That's a good start, and I'll post similar orders. I'll take it from here, Your Majesty. That's all I can ask for, Prime Minister. Good luck, and may Allah be with you. Pers pressed a button on his phone which would call in Mickle Oved. May he be with all of us, Your Majesty, especially if Voldemort's men have infiltrated our ministries of magic. There was a swear on the other end of the line, followed by, I didn't even think about that. I'm going to check that out right now. Fard out. Chapter 179. Dear Leader Voldemort. Tuesday, May 21, 19,961,730 local time Presidential Palace Pyongyang Democratic People's Republic of Korea Horcruxes left. 3. Ring, Snake, Cup, Comrade Chang Sung-teek. Chang Sung-teek looked up in surprise, as he hadn't been expecting anyone. His hand had made it halfway to his gun before he recognized his visitor as Moon Jai, the Minister of Magic. He still wasn't entirely comfortable around these wizards. However, the minister's reasoning had been sound. Important North Koreans like him and Kim Jong-il needed to have wizarding protection at all times. Otherwise, it could have been possible for the defector Choi Yoon-lee to infiltrate the palace and assassinate one of them. Needless to say, the death of either man, especially when Kim Jong-nam was too young to take over on his own, would bring about the downfall of the North Korean regime and its communist hopes. He acknowledged the minister with a nod. Good afternoon, Minister. How may I help you? The minister looked uneasy. There's been an incident, sir. We believe that your life may be in danger, and we need to get you out of here. Your private helicopter is waiting, comrade. After you, sir. Shit, he thought. Who was going after him now? One of the dear leader's brothers who felt like he should be next in line. He figured he'd find out sooner or later. First things first, if the minister thought there was going to be a problem, he was usually right. He needed to get out of here. The minister saluted and stepped out of the way as he walked through the door. He was about to turn around and ask Moon Jai Jai for more information when he heard the man shout a strange word. Stupefy. Something hit him in the back, and he toppled over like a felled tree. Within seconds, he was asleep. The last thing he remembered was the minister standing over his head, with, of all things, a shaver in his hand, 1732 local time. Lucius Malfoy took another swig of the polyjuice potion, which would maintain the form of the muggle he had killed to create the character Moon Jai Jai. Satisfied that his cover was impregnable for at least another hour, he dragged Chang Sungtik's inert form into a closet, tied him up with magical bonds, and Fidelius the closet with himself as the secret keeper. That would prevent anyone from finding Chang Sungtik. If the reports from the Death Eater spy in the South's Ministry of Magic were correct, there was about to be an attempt to overthrow the leader of North Korea. The plans were for the South to kill off Kim Jong-il, allow the North to install Chang Sung-tik as his successor, and then imperious the new leader in a way which would make him supportive of the South's goals. This was a chance the Death Eaters couldn't pass up. If the spy had been fed false information, Lucius would just go back to the closet, revive Chang Sung-tik, and obliviate him so he had no idea that anything had happened. There would be no risk to Lucius or any other Death Eater. If, on the other hand, the spy was telling the truth, Lucius had been ordered to allow the coup to go on just as planned. He was to put up a token resistance, but he was to allow the South to replace Kim Jong-il with Chang Sung-tik. What the South wouldn't realize, of course, was that the person they had elevated to the presidency hadn't actually been Chang Sung-tik. Grinning, he collected all of Chang Sung-tik's hairs, put them in a bag, and stowed it away in his robe. He then apparated out of the room, his mission accomplished 1745 local time. Lord Voldemort looked at himself in the mirror and smiled as Chang Sung-tik's face stared back at him. You know, it's been a long time since I had hair. Thank you very much, my dear Lucius. Or should I say, Moon Jai Jai? Lucius bowed deeply. It is an honor to serve you, my lord. Once you have control of this country, the world will be yours to do with as you please. How are the South's preparations going? The spy is reporting that everyone is moving into position now, my lord. The Death Eaters comprising the so-called North's Ministry of Magic will put up a fight, of course, enough to make it look realistic, but not enough to prevent the coup. We'll only go after the attackers once you've been raised to the position of dear leader. They will likely be so happy that their coup has succeeded that their guard will be completely down. Excellent, Lucius. Now, if you would excuse me, I have to head over to Chang Sung-tik's office. I don't want anyone to miss me. 18:00:00 local time, 3, 2, 1, go. Choi Yoon didn't need to be told twice. She turned into space to apparate over to the dear leader's office, a few dozen miles away. The magic didn't work. She swore and tried again, also to no avail. Finally, one of the other wizards on the raid shouted, "They've protected the presidential palace against apparition. Either the North's Ministry of Magic has cast some spells to protect high national officials, or they know we're coming." A third person shook his head. "Let's hope it's the former. All right, people, let's go to Plan B. Let's see if they're preventing Portkeys as well." The South's Minister of Magic pulled a shoelace out of his pocket, pointed his wand at it, and muttered, "Portus." The shoelace glowed for a second, and the minister told everyone headed to Kim Jong-il's office to grab onto it with their left hands. 5 seconds later, the world disappeared around them, and they started flying through the air. The wizard in charge of the assassination attempt had to scream to be heard over the noise of the Portkey transmission. "Everyone, get out your wand, but don't let go of the shoelace. We should be there momentarily." You know what to do. 18:00, 17 local time. Kim Jong-il nearly fell over with surprise when 5 people suddenly appeared in his office. These people hadn't been summoned, and they were carrying a rope of some sort. This was an assassination attempt, and they were going to try to hang him. He shouted, "Guards, kill these people." The guards were well trained. Within seconds, they had pulled out their guns and had started firing on the intruders. 2 of them went down, a man and a woman. The woman looked vaguely familiar, but he couldn't place her. He was in the process of ducking underneath his desk when one of them pulled out a wand and pointed it at him. He reached for his own sidearm. He was a trained marksman, after all, and he'd practiced repeatedly for situations like this. Unfortunately, nothing could travel faster than light, and the Avada Kedavra hit him before he was able to fire. 18:00, 21 local time. The 3 surviving wizards cheered as the dear leader fell. One of the cheers broke off abruptly as a bullet hit the excited wizard in the chest. There were only 2 wizards left, and at least 5 guards. Choi Yoon was dead. The 2 remaining wizards glanced at each other, concern evident on their faces. It was time to get creative. Finally, one nodded and asked the other to cover him. He hid behind a door and cast the Patronus charm. Seconds later, a shining eagle burst out of his wand. The guards suddenly squawked in fear and suddenly headed for the door. Trust ghost-like apparitions to clear a room of muggles quickly. The wizard who had cast the Patronus dismissed the eagle and cast spells after the guards, knocking them out so they couldn't spread the alarm any further. Meanwhile, the other survivor arranged Kim Jong-il's body so that it looked like he had had a heart attack. If everything went as planned, no one would have suspected foul play. He then obliviated the sleeping guards and sent the shoelace Portkey back to home base to get people to pick up the bodies. Once that was done, he headed out of the room just as alarms started blaring inside the compound. There must have been a security camera they'd forgotten about. 18:00, 29 local time. Lord Voldemort, in his alias as Chang Sungteek, suddenly jerked back as the alarms went off in the compound. Even though he knew that the insurrectionists would likely trigger the alarm, the noise grated on his ears. Besides, it had caught him off guard. Seconds later, a whole platoon of Muggle soldiers raced into the room, followed by virtually half of the North Korean Ministry of Magic. He raised his hands obediently so as to not alarm the Muggles. He kept his wand hidden in the sleeve of his, Chang Sungteek's uniform. He stared at the head of the Muggle platoon. "What is going on here? What has happened? Explain." The Muggle saluted. "Sir, the dear leader has been assassinated. We believe some wizards from the south managed to enter the compound and catch him by surprise. We need to get you out of here. You are, after all, the next person in line for the position of dear leader. These men will protect you." "Come with me." Voldemort feigned fear. "You men think you're going to be able to take out a wizard? How?" The Muggle indicated one of the wizards. "This man is a wizard. He belongs to the Ministry of Magic." Voldemort stared at him. "We've got a Ministry of Magic. What?" The Muggle cut him off as gunshots rang out in the distance. "I'll tell you later. Let's get out of here." The Muggles and Death Eaters surrounded him with a defensive screen as they herded him through the corridors and over to a helicopter. Voldemort heard gunshots and screams down a side corridor and caught a brief glimpse of soldiers fighting with wizards. Lucius was there, and Voldemort was able to watch the Death Eater take out 3 of the intruding wizards with one spell. So far, so good. Local time. This had gone on long enough, Lucius thought. The soldiers were reporting that Voldemort, Chang Sungteek, had been sent to a secured location and that his succession was safe. Phase 1 of the operation was over. Phase 2 had begun. Slowly but surely, he ordered the Death Eaters to slowly let themselves be beaten back. Muggle soldiers fell for the north, but he didn't care about the Muggles. The conspirators cheered and tried to follow up on their advantage. Finally, Lucius gave the signal, and all of the wizards apparated out of there. He thanked Voldemort profusely for creating an apparition spell which would only work for Death Eaters. 18:05, 42 local time. The last pockets of resistance collapsed as the last North Korean Muggles fell beneath the curses and hexes of the attacking Southerns. The attackers couldn't believe it. Against all odds, they'd pulled it off. They'd killed Kim Jong-il and made it look as if he had had a heart attack. The leader of the expedition called off the celebration immediately, however. "We're not done yet, people. Obliviate all the survivors, portkey away the bodies, and modify the video cameras. We don't want anyone to realize that there was a coup. Get those news crews out of here and figure out where the hell Chang Sung-teek is. Move it." 18:06, 11 local time. The injured DPRK soldier gulped as the Southerner pointed a wand at his face. "All right, soldier. Where is he?" He blinked. "Where's who?" "Chang Sung-teek, Kim Jong-il's successor." The soldier smiled. "You're not going to find out. It's a secret location. I'm not letting you murderous bastards anywhere near him." The wizard smiled at him. "We'll see about that. Legilimens." 18:10, 53 local time. The conspirators screamed as they overcame the Muggle guards protecting Chang Sung-teek's safe house and raced into the building. They caught the North's wizards completely off guard, killing a few of them and stunning the rest. Finally, about 13 minutes after the raid began, they had Chang Sung-teek in their sights. The man backed up against the wall and started screaming for his mother. Grinning, the South's Minister of Magic pointed his wand at the cowering man and shouted, "Imperio." Chang Sung-teek stopped cowering at once. A brief struggle contorted his face. Suddenly he smiled and shook his head. "I don't think so, wizard." And before the South could react, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a wand. The South's Minister of Magic barely had enough time to scream before Chang Sung-teek suddenly hit him in the chest with an Avada Kedavra. The invaders suddenly froze in shock. When they regained control of themselves, they found no fewer than 70 wands pointing at them. Within seconds, every single wizard from the South was dead, and the Death Eaters were busy cleaning away the bodies. 19:00:00 local time. Voldemort, still in his guise as Chang Sung-teek, stood in front of the television cameras. Next to him was an official representing the court system. He had the original manuscript of the Juche tradition in his hand. Voldemort thought it was rather ironic. The official turned to him. "Chang Sung-teek, raise your right hand and place your left on this book. Repeat the following oaths after me. I, Chang Sung-teek." Voldemort spoke the oaths clearly and precisely. It's not like he was going to abide by them at all. After all, he wasn't Chang Sung-teek. The camera flashed as he finished his final oath. The official removed the manuscript and stretched out his hand to shake Voldemort's. "Congratulations, dear leader." Voldemort smiled for the cameras. Outside, he could hear thousands of people cheering and applauding in the square outside. The world was about to change, he thought. Chapter 180, A Gathering of Werewolves. Tuesday, May 21, 19,960,929, Z/1929, Korean local time outside of London, England, Horcruxes left. 3. Ring, snake, cup. Lauren should have known better than to take the motorway into London. Traffic was backed up as far as she could see. Granted, the meeting was at 12:00, so she had plenty of time. Still, she couldn't stand traffic jams. She had been doing the dishes a day after the meeting with Dumbledore when she had heard a soft tapping against the window. She had looked up to see a small owl hooting at her through the glass. In its talons was a piece of paper. She stared at the owl in confusion. The owl hooted once more and waved its leg impatiently. It seemed as if the owl wanted to give her the paper. That didn't make much sense, she thought. Then again, she was living in a world where wizards existed, and she was doomed to transform into a monster at the beginning of June. Skeptical about what she was supposed to do with an owl, she opened the window. The owl flew in and dropped the paper on the kitchen table. It then hooted at her a couple of times and flew away. Curious, she unrolled the paper and saw that it was a small note, "Dear Mrs. Mistry. There is going to be a meeting for all new Muggle werewolves in the Ministry of Magic at noon on 21 May. At this meeting, you will be able to meet other people with your condition and receive a week's worth of a potion which will help ease your transformation. Please make it a point to be there. We will be meeting at a telephone booth outside the ministry at 11:45. Sincerely, Rufus Scrimgeour." Minister of Magic. She was a bit nervous about being surrounded by more of these monsters, but she figured she didn't have much of a choice. So she pocketed the note, told Lucas about the meeting, and continued on with her chores for the rest of the day. She turned on the radio to get the traffic report. It was the bottom of the hour, so she figured she'd be able to catch up on the news as well. She caught the 10:30 broadcast in mid-sentence. "Oath of office half an hour ago. He's already told the people of North Korea that he has no intention of continuing Kim Jong-il's policies and has new ways for making North Korea into a great nation." Lauren stared at the radio. Something had happened to Kim Jong-il. Just what the word needed at a time like this, she thought. A power vacuum in North Korea. The reporter yielded the floor to the main announcer. "I hope he can do so, Michael. The president of South Korea has called him and offered his congratulations and condolences on the loss of the North's dear leader. He is hoping that the new ruler will be willing to improve diplomatic ties with the South and end the Korean War once and for all. For those of you who are just turning in, there is breaking news out of North Korea. Kim Jong-il, the head of the communist state and son of its founder, has just died of a heart attack. Preliminary investigations indicate that there was no foul play involved, and it was just the stress of leading the country. He has been succeeded by one of his chief generals, Chang Sung-teik. Very little is known about this man, but from what we've seen so far, he seems to be a little more willing than his predecessor to improve the lives of the North Korean people. We think now we've got an update from Michael again up in Pyongyang. What's going on, Michael?" The first speaker came back on. "Chang Sung-teik has just made a most remarkable announcement. It appears that he is a wizard as well as a capable general. He just made sparks fly out of what appears to be a wand and levitated himself up in the air." The main broadcaster cut in. "A wizard, like Dumbledore, Scrimgeour, or the dreaded Tom Riddle." "Yes, David, a wizard. He's speaking now. Hold on a second. He's saying that now that the statute of secrecy is gone, he believes that he will be able to use his magical powers to improve the productivity of the North Korean state and return it to prosperity. And now, David, you have to see this. He's conjuring gold coins out of thin air and throwing them into the crowd. The people here love him. I should imagine. Did the rest of Kim Jong-il's cabinet know he was a wizard? I don't think so. They look absolutely stunned, to be honest. However, I cannot deny that a strong ruler who cares for his people would be a welcome change for North Korea. I hope he stays in power, at least if he's sane." "Where are Kim Jong-nam and the rest of the prior leader's family?" "They're at the funeral home, paying their respects to their departed comrade. Chang claims they're going to be there for a while and does not want them to be disturbed. He has forbidden any reporters to get anywhere near there." The world, of course, had no idea that Voldemort had quietly killed off the rest of the dear leader's family to prevent them from staging a counter-coup. Lucius and the rest of the North's Ministry of Magic had purged most of the former generals after the Dark Lord had taken office and Imperius the rest. "I see, Michael. I must say, I do find it a bit disturbing that we've got a wizard in charge of a country. Doesn't that give him a lot of power?" "He's still going to have to abide by the Constitution, David. So far, he seems all right, but I freely admit it's early, and this is the honeymoon phase." "But who's going to be able to punish him if he doesn't?" "The North's Ministry of Magic, I suppose. Maybe that Dylannis fellow from the Wizarding United Nations, or whatever that organization was." "Aye. Lauren turned off the radio. A wizard now controlled North Korea. Depending on whether this guy was as much of a psychopath as Kim Jong-il had been, that was either very bad or very good. She really hoped it would be the latter. But if it did prove to be the former, she'd find a place to move far too away from London, and hoped that if London did get nuked, it wouldn't be when she was stuck in the Ministry of Magic with 4 legs instead of 2. It took her a long time to make it through the traffic. However, eventually she reached the rendezvous point. She parked her car and walked over to the designated location. She counted 25 people milling around in the vicinity, including herself. She recognized most of them from the football match where she had been attacked. They had all been sitting in her section. It appeared that the Prime Minister's word had gotten out. Supposedly, there had been 27 survivors, and the ministry had been able to round up all but 2 of them. Perhaps they'd be able to contain this pandemic after all. Most of the attack victims were men between 20 and 40, a typical demographic for a football match. She counted only 6 women and did what she could to talk to them. They appeared to be as scared as she was and started complaining that their husbands' boyfriends' friends were going to dump them because they were going to start turning into monsters. That set alarm bells ringing in Lauren's mind, as she could imagine Lucas thinking like that. She tried to change the subject, and the women promptly started talking about the weather, which was boring, and the North Korean incident, which just made her feel even more nervous. There was a loud pop nearby. Heads turned all over the place, and Lauren saw that 3 men had appeared maybe 10 feet away. She recognized 2 of them, Albus Dumbledore and Rufus Scrimgeour. The third had a forbidding expression on his face and greasy black hair. Scrimgeour bowed to the crowd. "Welcome, my friends. In case you may have forgotten, I'm Rufus Scrimgeour, Minister of Magic. To my left is Albus Dumbledore, Transfiguration teacher and former headmaster of the Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. To my right is Severus Snape, Professor of Defense Against the Arts at Hogwarts. Prior to his position as the Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher, he taught potions. His potions experience is going to be critical when it comes to helping you through the months and years to come. I'll let Professor Snape explain." Lauren groaned. Potions, she thought. She couldn't stand the taste of stuff like Robitussin. Now they expected her to drink ground-up newt eyes. The greasy-haired man reached into his cloak and brought out a large box. This elicited lots of awed remarks from the people in the crowd. The reason was obvious. Lauren had no idea how that box had fit in the cloak. The man opened up the box to reveal 27 stoppered bottles. Professor Snape indicated the bottles. "Ladies and gentlemen, please pay attention. These bottles contain 1 week's worth of a magical concoction known as the Wolfsbane potion. Quaffing 1 dosage of this potion each day between the first quarter moon and full moon will help alleviate most of the side effects associated with being a werewolf. Your headaches will be fewer and further between, and you will only get brief nausea the day before the full moon. You are to drink the last dosage of the potion the day before the full moon rises. When that happens, you will likely change form into that of the wolf. However, you will be able to maintain your mind in wolf form, so you will be able to think and reason like a human. As a result, you will act like you would have had you been in human form. In particular, you will have no desire to bite or attack people. Most of you are wearing ankle bracelets so we can track you. If you aren't wearing one, tell us and we'll give you one. During the afternoon of the day before the full moon, the bracelets will teleport you to a secure location so you can be given a mandatory dose of Wolfsbane potion and transform in a safe and controlled environment. Once the night is over and the moon sets, you will revert back to human form. Note that there will be 2 centers for transformation, one for men and one for women. This is because you will have to take off your clothes before you transform. Otherwise, your clothes will tear apart when you switch to wolf form and leave you utterly naked when you return to normal. Once you have reverted back to human form, you will have 1 hour to recollect your belongings and put on your clothes again. The bracelet will then take you back to the place you were teleported from. If you wish to use Wolfsbane potion for future transformations after 1 June, you should contact one of the three of us between 2 June and 15 June so we have enough time to brew the potion and send it to you. Once we have you on our lists, we will send you a week's supply of Wolfsbane every month until you tell us otherwise. Be advised that Wolfsbane has a few side effects. You should not use Wolfsbane if you are nursing, pregnant, or may become pregnant. Do not drive or operate heavy machinery while using Wolfsbane. There can also be liver problems. Simple blood tests can check for liver problems. Snape studied the crowd. Lauren had the distinct impression he was counting people. Finally, he muttered under his breath, 25. Wonderful. Aloud, he asked, one more thing. I see that 2 of our number are not here. Do either of you know the whereabouts of James Lovett or Harrison Cooper? They were also bitten, and we haven't been able to track them down yet. Everyone shook their head. Snape grunted. Well, let's hope they'll show up at some point. All right, I'll hand out the potions now. Don't fight for them, you'll all get one.